on behalf of BMES and CBIT, we'd like to welcome you to our Medical Design and Innovation panel. My name is Molly Buckland, and I am a third-year immunobiology PhD student serving as the Innovation Fellow at CBIT. I'll be hosting the first half of today's panel, and I'm looking forward to an engaging conversation with our four fantastic innovators who will share some of their experiences and expertise with us. We ask that if you haven't already, please change your Zoom name to your first and last names with pronouns if you feel comfortable. We will use these names to cross-check with your Eventbrite registration in order to send our Grubhub gift cards following this afternoon's event. We would also appreciate if you could keep your cameras on in order to make this session as engaging as possible. So before diving in, I'd like to introduce Dr. Margaret Cartiera, the Innovation Director for CBIT, who has nearly 20 years of experience working across the medical device, diagnostics, health IT, pharmaceutical, and biotechnology sectors. She will provide a brief overview of BMES, as well as details on CBIT and how you can engage with us. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Molly. Welcome, everybody. As Molly mentioned, I'm Margaret Cartiera, and I work with the Center for Biomedical Innovation and Technology. Next slide. Before I go into the ways that you can engage with CBIT, I want to just share how excited we are to be partnering with the BMES group on campus and to highlight a few of the ways that you can engage with BMES and to understand how they bring awareness to the field of biomedical engineering. They really are looking to function as a support network for students within the major through different activities that they hold, whether they're virtual events, matching swag, acting as a connector between students and the department, and also really looking to welcome not only biomedical engineers, but also folks beyond in other science disciplines to really collaborate and understand the impact of the biomedical engineering discipline. So please come check out their website and join their mailing list so you can learn more about their upcoming events. It's a really fantastic group, and we've enjoyed working with them on different events, including the Annual Healthcare Hackathon and this panel discussion. Next slide, please. And just a few minutes to tell you about CBIT and the way that you can engage with our organization. Our group really is focused on catalyzing biomedical and healthcare innovation development, as well as commercialization on campus. We work not only with faculty members, but also with students in many different kinds of ways. And so we are really looking to offer a variety of ways for these different groups to engage with us on innovation and their innovation journey and explore their desires or their passion to take ideas they might have forward, or if they just want to better understand that process and maybe connect with a clinician or a researcher that might be working on an interesting idea. If you'd like to take formal coursework in the space, we do offer two different classes on campus, Management 657, which is also cross-listed at the medical school, so that is creating healthcare ventures, as well as BENG 406, which is really looking at medical software and the user interface. So you can check out those classes if you'd like to sign up for one of those. We are working in partnership with groups like SciCity to offer themed accelerators or intensives, as well as with the health system to offer workshops like clinical redesign and other kinds of opportunities. The Annual Hackathon is something that you may have heard about, and they're really fun weekends that you could participate in. We just had our last annual healthcare hackathon, and it was our first virtual event with a fantastic international presence. So lots of people coming from everywhere to work together on different clinical needs and to solve them in the course of a weekend. And we work in particular with our different entrepreneurs that come together at CBIT to provide deep mentorship. So if you already have an idea or you're thinking about an idea in response to a clinical need, we would love to engage with you to think through that concept and how you can move that idea forward on that path of innovation. So taking it not only on that technical path, but thinking through the regulatory challenges, clinical challenges, and the business landscape. So please engage with us. Check out our website, check out our Twitter handle, and we'd love to hear more from you. Set up an office hour and tell us what you're working on.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret, for that exciting overview. And we are also on Instagram. So we hope you'll all keep these great resources in mind, and please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions. So before moving on to our speakers, we'd like to have you all fill out a brief poll so that we can get an idea of who you are and what you're interested in. So I will launch this now, and it should just take a couple of minutes here. Okay, so you should be seeing the first question. Which of the following best describes you? And as well as what interests you regarding, if you're interested in starting a new company, career paths, internships, whatever it may be. Okay. I think that should do it. So we shared the results here. It looks like we have, are you guys able to see the results? Yeah. So it looks like we have a lot of undergrads, which is awesome. A handful of fellow graduate students and a very diverse spectrum of interests. So this is great. And this may be helpful for our speakers to keep in mind and for you guys to engage in different, opportunities for different questions throughout the panel. This is really awesome. So yeah, new companies, career paths, work and internship. Some people currently working in innovation and other people wanting to learn more, of course, and free food. So, all right. Thank you very much. So we'll close out of that and move on to our speakers. So I'd now like to briefly introduce our 4 speakers who will then provide a bit more information about their area of expertise and background. So first we have Dr. Stewart Campbell, who is an associate professor of biomedical engineering and cellular and molecular physiology here at Yale University, where he leads the integrative cardiac biomechanics laboratory. Next, we have Mrinal Kumar, who is a 2018 graduate of Yale BME and founder of On Track Rehab. I'm also pleased to introduce Dr. Lisa Lattanza, who is the chair and chief of Orthopaedics and Rehabilitation at Yale. Finally, we have Dr. David Pearlstone, who is the CEO of DICOM Director and is a clinical surgical oncology physician. So thank you all for graciously sharing your time with us today. And I guess, Dr. Pearlstone, would you like to begin by introducing yourself? And then I guess I'll just call up the next one after that.
Sure, thanks. You can hear me?
Yes, we can
hear
you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Molly. Thanks so much. Thank you, Anmei, for inviting me to come. Anmei Little is working with us right now, and she invited me, and I'm very, very, very happy to be here. I graduated from SOM in 2010 in the healthcare program. So Yale's very near and dear to me, besides the fact that our office is right around the corner. I spent my life as a surgical oncologist, practiced surgical oncology for 25 years. By just continued happenstance, I kept finding myself in really interesting labs with engineers. I think I decided that my mind tends to go that way. So I was in South Carolina for a long time, and I ended up on the faculty at Clemson in the Department of Engineering, helping to teach what we used to call tech transfer. The idea of, I'm a doctor, I'm a surgeon, come in and present a bunch of brilliant engineering students a problem and have them solve it because we are too deep in the weeds, we can't see our problems. So I've done that for a long time. I then moved back up here and was on the faculty at Stevens Institute of Technology in New Jersey doing the same thing. And then I ended up going to business school at Yale in 2008, which was absolutely extraordinary and wonderful experience. And through again, a bunch of interesting networking and connections and odd happenstance, I ended up being the executive director of a incubator in New Haven that doesn't really exist anymore, but was focused on digital healthcare solutions. And one day in walked a gentleman with a product that completely blew my mind as a surgeon. What he had done is taken a CAT scan and turned it into a hologram that I could look at on an augmented or virtual reality device. So to cut to the chase, 2 weeks later, I quit my job and he asked me to be CEO of the company. So I've been CEO of that company for 2 years, going on 3 years now, actually. We do a few different things, but our core business is this advanced digital imaging in medicine. And right now we are very focused on holographic imaging. We can take any CAT scan or MRI, turn it into a rather extraordinary three-dimensional image. And that can be used in surgical planning. And now we're working towards actual in the operating room surgical guidance. An extraordinary amount of fascinating opportunities of AR, VR in medicine. Sorry, I don't want to get too much off on that. Anyway, that's who I am. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We'll now move on to Dr. Stewart Campbell, and I'm just going based on the order I see you guys on my Zoom screen.
Sure, thanks, Molly. It's great to be here. I think this is a really exciting group, and you know, it's just great to see so many of you here and interested in healthcare innovation. So I have been at Yale for the last 8.5, almost 9 years, hard to believe, but I came here as an assistant professor, and my background, both of my degrees are in bioengineering or biomedical engineering, and I have a long-standing interest in cardiac muscle physiology. And when I established my lab here at Yale, we were beginning to get very interested in leveraging induced pluripotent stem cell technology, which basically allows you to create a stem cell line from a patient blood sample. And we wanted to see if we could figure out how to transform these iPS cell lines into functioning cardiac tissue. And the specific interest that we had was to see if we could then use this as a diagnostic or as a disease model in vitro to understand inherited heart disorders. So we've been working on that line of research for a number of years now and have created what I think is a very interesting and powerful platform for not just studying inherited diseases, but hopefully doing some personalized medicine and also helping with pharmaceutical development for drug companies that are looking to modulate and target cardiac contraction. In 2018, I co-founded a company called Propria, and Propria is now commercializing, after having licensed this engineered heart tissue technology from Yale. They're working on sort of consolidating and streamlining this technology and then marketing it to academics and drug companies so far. So that's kind of a broad overview of what I'm working on in my area.
Okay, great, thank you. My internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell. Next, we have Mrinal. If you would mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Molly, and thanks, Molly and Margaret, for organizing this. And it's really a privilege for me to be here and to speak to everyone here. And so I appreciate everyone taking the time. I think I was in a lot of your shoes just a couple of years ago. I'm the founder and CEO of OnTrack Rehab. OnTrack Rehab actually started during my senior year at Yale when my co-founders and I took a course called Medical Device Design with Dr. Joe Zinter. I'm sure a lot of you know him. The thesis of that course is kind of that physicians in the area will come in and talk to the students about the problems they're having in their clinic, and then students try to develop a solution for it over the course of the semester. The physician we spoke to was the director of athletic medicine at Yale, and he identified, a lot of gaps in his ability to rehabilitate concussion. And so we got to work building both hardware and software to try to optimize the concussion recovery process. Over the course of the past 2 years, we broadened beyond just concussion, moving to broader balance disorders and vestibular disorders, as our technology has the potential to not only help patients recover from concussion, but also help the elderly improve their balance and reduce fall risk, or help folks recover from the balance issues associated with stroke rehabilitation. And last year, we partnered up with the US Navy to continue developing our hardware, and are currently going through the process of trying to raise a round of venture financing and expand ourselves so that we can get both our software and hardware to the market over the next 18 months. But I'm totally happy to talk during this panel or after, if it can be helpful, about sort of that transition from going from an undergrad at Yale to running your own fledgling company and what that's like.
Excellent. Thank you, Mrinal. And finally, Dr. Lattanza.
Hi, everyone. Really pleased to be here today and to see everyone and discuss some exciting topics. I'm Dr. Lisa Lattanza. I'm an orthopedic hand and upper extremity surgeon by training. I spent more than 20 years of my career at University of California, San Francisco, and then transitioned to Yale as the chair last year in 2019. So, you know, my path really, as a surgeon, we're always innovating in the operating room. And that doesn't mean necessarily we're developing technology every single day, but we're certainly innovating solutions to problems that are presented to us in the operating room that perhaps we had not encountered before. So my path to innovation really started in the operating room, and then getting to know some engineers that we collaborated with first in research and then in developing new products. I also consult for industry. I consult for Acumed, which is a orthopedic device company, and have taken some products from very early stages to market. One of the things that I really like to do is get involved with other people's products and tell them what we should change or not change and make things better. I've been involved in taking products out of circulation before they made it to market, sometimes saving companies lots and lots of money because there was a design flaw, or what was sort of developed in the engineering side didn't really 100% translate to the operative side. And I like doing all of that kind of thing. But really what set me down this path in a major way was a particular patient. It's a young child who'd had a post-traumatic deformity of the forearm with a very difficult three-dimensional deformity that needed to be corrected. And those are exceedingly difficult to correct in the forearm because there's two bones, they're wrapping around each other, there's soft tissue, it's unpredictable. It's very difficult to correct something in an axial, sagittal, and coronal plane all at once in the operating room. And I had been at a meeting where a company, Materialize, I had seen some of what they do with 3D surgical virtual planning and modeling. And I'd used 3D models in the OR even prior to this. And we're looking at 2008, 2009 is when I started using models. But this I thought was really great technology. It had been used in Belgium, but was not being used in the United States at this point in time. And so I did the first case using virtual surgical planning with 3D guided implants in the operating room in 2010, and I never looked back. And so a lot of my research and work has to do with the use of 3D technology in the operating room and surgical planning, and then taking that to the next space of virtual reality and artificial intelligence. And we're working on developing a center here for exactly that. And I need to get to know Dr. Pearlstone because it sounds like he's right up.
Hi, I'm your new best friend.
Yeah,
on May, you better be smiling listening to this because she's sitting here basically describing our business plan.
So it was totally worth the price of admission today to get to meet Dr. Pearlstone and hear what he's doing. And that's one of the great things for me about all of these different meetings is you just meet more people that are like-minded, that are doing something that overlaps with what you're doing. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and that's kind of my story.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lattanza. We are thrilled you're all here and that connection can happen. And Yeah, very excited to move on with the rest of the panel. So I will now start off the conversation with a few general questions before handing it over to Ellie and Anmei, who will moderate some questions from the audience. So we'll start with Mrinal and Dr. Campbell, if you guys don't mind. I'd like to begin by first asking you what your original experience was that sparked your passion for innovation and what steps you took to begin pursuing it. And I know you may have touched on this a little bit in your introduction, but maybe giving us a more formal overview would be helpful. So Mrinal, would you like to begin?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, for us, I think a lot of folks going through sort of the BME undergrad major are sort of fascinated by sort of that innovation culture at Yale and in New Haven, and what we see from Sci-City and CBIT and some of the courses as well, which are sort of entrepreneurially focused. A course like medical device design, medical software design, also being like that. So that's kind of what sparked my interest. I think what was key for me and the rest of my team was working with a clinician to identify a specific problem or pain point. And I think that's probably the biggest gap, maybe being an undergrad or even being a grad student interested in the healthcare space and innovation in the healthcare space, is that we lack perhaps the clinical experience, perhaps the technical experience. There are holes in our understanding, and we need to work with folks who are more experienced or sort of know the ropes better than we do in order to get into the space. And I think once we met with our mentor was Dr. Who was the athletic director at medicine, and we started working on the problem, we realized that the technology was really fun to work on, and the unmet need was pretty critical, and our technology could potentially work for it. So we worked on it over the course of that semester, and got a lot of support from Yale on the way, and then just started pretty much applying to grants. And there's a really great grant community surrounding not only Yale, but in Connecticut more broadly. That I think there's a lot of effort to sort of push forward innovation, and someone like Margaret was super helpful for us in putting together some of that early grant funding to get some prototypes off the ground, to ship some devices around the country, to get our first prototype to the Navy so they can test it out and tell us whether they were interested or not. And I think that's a great resource as Yale students. I know there are summer fellowships and there are post-grad fellowships and there are individual fellowships for projects, but I think once you find a problem you're interested in, starting to apply to those fellowships, get that first $10,000, $20,000, and just see what you can do with that is super helpful. And Yale provides resources even beyond, I think, just funding. Like, for example, getting a company incorporated and getting it off the ground. There's a Yale Law Clinic that can help you do that for free, right? And so really looking into the resources that are provided in Yale and Connecticut to just get you off the ground. And then, if you're interested in the project and it has potential, you can sort of run with it from there.
Great. Thank you very much, Mrinal. You pretty much answered my follow-up, which is what were some resources that you utilized to take your innovation to this level? But could you just mention, you mentioned how critical this clinical component was. What resource you used to establish that connection, or if you just, sort of cold called, reached out, how you went about that?
We were lucky in that we were connected with Dr. Who through the course. And so like taking those kind of courses is definitely helpful. I know BNG 406 is a very similar thesis to that course, except it's software rather than hardware. But I think as a undergrad, also you have a lot of exposure to professors, and you're definitely doing a thesis, or you're definitely doing work with someone in your department. And maybe there's someone more clinically oriented, maybe there's someone more research oriented, but talking to them and identifying the pain points even within their work, is a place to start. And that may not lead to a startup, or it may not lead to a company, or it may not lead to a project, but it'll get you brainstorming and get you thinking about, what are the kind of things that still need to be worked on, because I think there are a surprising amount of things that still need work.
Excellent. Thank you, Mrinal. So we'll move over to you, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah, so this is such a fascinating sort of group of people to bring together and the different perspectives. So, I actually had a very similar experience coming to Yale by being connected with clinicians and recognizing that I knew nothing about the problems that I was interested in solving. Like it really takes getting involved with surgeons, with physicians who are, who are sort of on the front lines, so to speak. in order to begin to appreciate the problems that are available to work on. So I guess I'll start by giving sort of a specific example in my case. So genetic testing is sort of the gold standard for tracing risk in families where there's one member that's discovered to have one of these inherited cardiac disorders known as hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. But the problem with genetic tests is that they depend on sort of what we understand about the genome and what's been established in linkage, large multi-generational, large family linkage studies. And so what that means is that, up to 60% of families that appeal to genetic testing to understand risk don't get any useful information from the genetic test. And once I understood that problem after talking to clinicians, I began to appreciate maybe the potential for a stem cell-based diagnostic tool that, instead of having to adhere to what we know about the genome, could instead look at what we know and understand about muscle physiology to be able to, to detect abnormalities early on. So there definitely is this moment in the innovative process where, at least you think that you have correctly heard and understood the problem, and then you recognize that you have tools to maybe solve that. Just a quick word more broadly on the level of innovation. I think there's a lot of ways to find your way into wanting to be part of innovation, and I would definitely not say that there's any one correct way. But for me, to sort of get back to your original question, it really was sort of this curiosity about the broader world thing, as a kid, that got me interested in innovation and just trying, dumb things like designing paper airplanes or, and graduating to more complex things. But I would just encourage people that are here today and they're listening in not to lose touch with sort of that underlying passion and that thrill that you get out of making things. I mean, this was a great question, and I was kind of reflecting on it long before I was an academic scientist. I was interested in creating in a lot of different forms. I played in a band in high school, and we tried writing music and wrote like a lot of bad songs. But we were creating. And when I was a senior in high school, I finally found myself in woodshop, and creating with that medium was just incredible for me. And I recognized that I love building stuff. So this is sort of a plug for staying in touch with just that fundamental excitement and passion for making stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And since you are sort of now both in industry and academia, in a sense, by founding a company and having a foot there, do you think you could provide some insight for a lot of the students here about if they're unsure of what to pursue as the next step, whether it's industry or academia or both, and reflecting on your recent experiences and, if you go back, what you may do differently along those lines?
Yeah, that's also a really great question. And, I would say that it's one step at a time. I was, I love being, in academics because the freedom is actually, it's stunning, right? In a lot of ways. I run my own research program, and I can decide exactly what I work on as long as I can convince somebody to fund it, in a grant. And in a lot of ways, that grant writing process is a lot more forgiving than like real markets, like out in the economy. And so there's trade-offs to everything. It is a lot of hard work, but in some ways, the academic track is sort of the ultimate in being able to be innovative just from a strictly, pie in the sky sort of level. However, I really have enjoyed, as I alluded to earlier, being in touch with real world problems, because it forces you to focus your thinking. When you start a company, as I've had to learn over the last 2 years, you then become subject to, the realities of business. And, that has pushed forward our ideas in unique ways as well. So, I think that there's enough time as somebody is developing their career to sort of organically figure out what it is that you love and what it is that you want to do. And you see that in the examples of my fellow panelists, they've done exactly this. There's an evolution, there's a progression. And so I would, I guess the bottom line is try not to worry so much about that. Just worry about what's next, what makes sense for your next step. And just understand that you can always pivot, you can always explore, you can always accomplish what it is that you want to do. The main thing is to just figure out what it is that you want to do, and then you can figure out how to do it.
Great advice. I certainly know I'm taking that to heart right now. All right. So moving on to our next couple of questions. Many of today's attendees, of course, are students who are aspiring to be or even are already innovators themselves. And mentorship is, of course, a fundamental part of understanding a new field and intellectual and professional growth. So for Dr. Pearlstone and Dr. Lattanza, would you mind telling us a bit about different forms of mentorship that you're currently involved in, such as taking on interns for a project or acting on advisory boards as a couple examples? And so with that, Dr. Lattanza, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you. Yes, that's a great question. And I think that's one of the hardest things for people when you're just getting started is to try to find mentors or people that you can work with that maybe already have projects going that then spur other projects. So the answer is an emphatic yes. Definitely involved in mentoring undergraduate, graduate students with regard to research projects. Some of the things we have going on right now are mostly in the 3D realm and also in finite element analysis as it involves the upper extremity. And so that's a big area for me personally. But from our department perspective, we have lots of our faculty are working on numerous different projects. And Dan Wisnia and Steve Tomasini teach the implant design course that was mentioned earlier by someone. And so a lot of us are involved in that. I'm working on an artificial intelligence project right now with a couple of folks who took that class last year. So we have, I personally have a lot going on and am always happy to have interns on various projects. And our department in general, we have a lot of things going on. So if you're interested in working in the realm of finite computer analysis, 3D virtual planning, 3D modeling, anything along those lines. We are right now, a couple of things we have going on. We're simulating a condition that children get after elbow fractures called cubitus varus. And we are simulating with finite element analysis and computer loading the change in the joint forces to prove that unlike what has been said in the literature, that this is simply a cosmetic condition, that it actually leads to early arthritis. So that's just one example of some of the projects that we are doing. And we're right now pulling together a P50 grant, a large grant that is really around this entire 3D surgical planning and execution that is across all of the disciplines in our department. So it's a really exciting time. There's a lot of new things that are going on in the department. And so anybody who's interested in working in any of those types of projects, we'd be happy to have you. I also need somebody who's good at writing program right now as well.
Great. And so speaking a bit to either mentorship that you've provided or mentorship that you've received, how do you think that this has influenced your own passion for innovation? Because it clearly, seems like you have a constant drive and just always coming up with new things and looking for the next best idea.
Is that for me?
That's, yes, follow up for you.
Okay. Mentorship is critical, and not only mentorship, but also sponsorship. And there is a difference. Sponsors are people who really kind of get you to the next level, involve you in projects, get you out on the podium, things like that, invite you in to be part of the founding of a company when you have ideas for that, those kinds of things, versus mentors who sort of help you along the way, pat you on the back, telling you you're doing a good job, those kinds of things. So there's a bit of a difference there, and I've benefited from both in my career for sure. I would say that, the person who mentored me in the realm of 3D is a surgeon who is now in his mid 80s and just retired. And he was doing 3D modeling in the 90s. And he was doing this looking at congenital deformities in kids that were very difficult to visualize on plain x-rays. And if you can't visualize something, you certainly can't go in surgically and correct it with any accuracy. So he was one of my big mentors along the way. And, I would say other mentors is once I started getting into the areas of really wanting to help develop implants for the operating room and make things simpler for orthopedic surgeons, I sought out mentors that maybe I wouldn't have normally. I looked for people. There was one person in my department who had been an engineer before he became an orthopedic surgeon, and he had multiple patents and had developed multiple different types of hip and knee implants for orthopedic surgery. And then he went the academic route after that. So he's been a great mentor, not only in how to start doing this, but also just what are the pitfalls along the ways? How do you what do you have to look for to protect yourself when you're working with industry and working with companies, and from a legal aspect and those kinds of things. So you need all different types of mentors to keep you on the right path.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So Dr. Pearlstone, we'll conclude this first part with you to hear a bit about your involvement with mentorship.
Thanks, Molly. Absolutely echo everything Dr. Lattanza said. I come from much of my life in clinical surgery, academic surgical oncology, where the nature of medical education and certainly surgical education is very much based on the it's based on the apprenticeship model, hopefully mentorship. So in medicine, I think about this a lot when I look at people like yourselves and my kids who are about your age, and finding their way in the world and trying to figure out what they want to do and how to do it. And it keeps occurring to me, wow, in medicine, it was certainly not easy, but it was very clear what the path was. There was no question what you were supposed to do. You just picked what topic you wanted. And if that's what you wanted, it was very clear to know what to do. And your mentors were there presented to you as possible mentors. So it's really kind of funny. I'm very sympathetic to people outside of that sort of training, although not that that was a great way to live, but it's hard to find a mentor, but it is absolutely, it's critical. I agree. I hope Aunt May will come out of her few months with us, feeling that she's been mentored. I have always very, very much not only been, I personally have been very, very blessed with 2 or 3 extraordinary mentors from all phases of my careers, and it's irreplaceable on so many levels. So to be a bit more specific, I was sort of trying to jot some things down. Excuse me. As far as practical advice, absolutely start in terms of for students, cast a wide net, look around for a lot of people. I want to throw out a concept that from the last question, I just can't express this enough to engineering students. In French, there's an expression, there's the same expression in English. May has heard this from me already, called déformation professionnelle. And the English translation of that is can't see the forest for the trees, essentially. And this is not a new concept, but boy, oh boy, is it becoming very, very real. And the idea is that, and this is how I ended up in this world, there are problems that we as clinical doctors, clinical surgeons, we cannot solve because we cannot see the forest for the trees. We are so embedded in the way we've been taught to think that has absolutely limited us in terms of our ability to think outside the box, frankly, not even think outside the box, just to color outside the lines a little bit is very, very difficult. So the idea of bringing in a very bright engineer who knows none of the rules of medicine and now throws out ideas about solving problems, that's brilliant. If you want to read a really great case of this, there's another school up in Boston you may have heard of, and they have there's a great story, the development of artificial human skin. There was a guy on one side of the River Charles who was brilliant about tissue engineering and knew how to make cells grow, and he could grow skin, but it kept clumping up into balls and he couldn't figure out how to make it grow onto a matrix. Meanwhile, on the other side of the river was a guy at another famous institution, and he was an expert at building scaffolding of biodegradable substances. And when the two of them got together, that was how they were able to suddenly figure out how to grow artificial skin in sheets. So it's this idea of getting someone who knows something about one thing, someone knows something about the other, and get them together. That is where the magic happens. Sorry, I got a little off the mentor topic, but I can't stress that enough, that you guys are sitting in such an exciting time right now. Oh my goodness, I guess you could always say that. This is a very exciting time, and it's exciting for people doing what you do. People are starting, this idea is kind of coming to fruition. People understand, like, listen to outsiders in medicine, and they have ideas that, okay, we can adapt them and make them work. And that's how we're discovering fascinating things that 10 years ago would have been considered heretical for a surgeon to do, now are acceptable because someone just who didn't know the rules of, like, you can't do that, and showed how you actually could do that. So sorry, like I said, not really so much on the mentoring topic.
No, that's great. And just as a follow-up to that, Dr. Pearlstone, keeping in mind that you can't see the forest through the trees, but also keeping in mind that you have a lot of experience through these great collaborations, as you said, and the value of this interdisciplinary work. How has that informed your view of the field of biomedical technology and device development? And this is a bit of a killer question to end with, but where do you see it going and greatest potentials for growth based on what you've seen and people both in and out of your field that you've worked with?
So to go to the first question, my first sort of thoughts about this, like I said, was when I first started teaching this tech transfer idea, and the woman I taught the course with, who's a brilliant engineer, and she really exposed me to this concept, and so I started reading a bit more about it. But the future is very wide open. I think that's really the best conclusion, that there's I think never before in history has there been a time when people in clinical medicine are more willing to listen to engineers and adopt their ideas. So I think it's a very unique point in time for that.
Great, thank you so much. So with that, I will now hand it over to Elliot and May, who will allow for questions and moderate questions from the audience. So thank you all for a great start. And
oops, I think Molly froze for a second, but thank you, Molly, for starting us off. And thank you to all the speakers for joining us today and sharing your experiences in innovation. I'm sure that our attendees are eager to ask you questions of their own. So with that, everyone feel free to drop questions in the chat, or you can use the raise hand feature, which will bring you to the top of the screen, and I'll call on you to unmute. And you're able to ask questions to all the speakers or to one in particular. Just note that in your question. So chat feature and raise hand feature. And we'll do this until probably about 10 minutes.
While people are sort of doing that, I wanted to throw something in, if I could, Ellie and Molly, about this idea of cross-fertilization and this, deformation professionnelle, and why you guys are in such a unique position. You are very, very fortunate to be at Yale University, believe it or not. I know you're cursing the day you ever got there, but Yale, so I am very proud of the School of Management, because the School of Management was voted the #1 business school in the country for being the most integrated with the other components of the university. And that is the basis of this cross-fertilization idea. Get out of, you are surrounded by so many smart people in so many different things, and they are looking for you. That's the thing. That's what I'm here to, again, I can tell you, there are people with questions that you have the answers to. And it's all about the ecosystem and getting into an environment where there is this good exchange of the ideas across disciplines. And Yale is really good at it, better at it than probably any other university. So they say, take advantage of that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pearlstone, for your words of wisdom. Actually, our first question in the chat from Vanessa is for you. And Vanessa is wondering, have you debated between an MD versus an MBA, or did you always know that you wanted to work at the intersection of them both?
Never even thought about it. Never in a million years would you have told me I'd be here today doing this. If you asked me 30 years ago, I would have thought I'd be in the operating room right now. I went into medicine absolutely all about surgery, particularly about surgery and what I wanted to do. Take it for however you want. How I ended up doing what I do is a continual series of, just in my view, bizarre circumstances that ended up working out quite well. Maybe that's the way life is. I don't know. Maybe the skill is to just continually put yourself in situations where you're surrounded by interesting options. But anyway, I got to a certain point in medicine in 2006 or 7. I was actually on the faculty at Yale. And, things were looking pretty weird in medicine. And everyone was, where's things going? And I heard an ad for going to business school on the radio. Howie Foreman had just started the MBA program, and that just sounded interesting. So I went on a whim, honestly. And my goodness, it was the greatest thing I ever did. I absolutely loved it. It completely changed my life. So I get asked a lot about MD, MBA programs. I'm mentoring a guy over at Penn now who's doing the MD, MBA program. And there's a lot of moving parts in it. And it's also very hard to predict the future. When I was your age, God, I sound old. When I was coming up, things were very, very different. There was no such thing as an MD, MBA. In fact, if you were an MD with an MBA, you were spit on to a large degree. Now it's a far more attractive area. So it's all very, very new. And I would take it on a very personal level and find your mentor and have a very personal discussion and try and sort out what your goals are. Boy, it's hard. Try and picture where you're going to be at the age of 45 and what do you want to be doing? Because that's what it's all about. Are you going to be happy with your choice that you're going to make at the tender young age, and then you're going to be 50 and you're going to be doing the same thing, as it's still going to float your boat? That's tough. But my MBA experience was absolutely extraordinarily wonderful. I absolutely loved it. That had a lot to do with Yale and Howie and SOM and all of that. But I certainly would say anyone who's interested in medicine, God help you if you don't get some business education, because you'll end up like every other doctor for the last 50 years, which is smart but really stupid. I'll leave it there. I think Dr. Lattanza is laughing.
While we wait for some questions in the chat, I have a question for Mrinal. How did you manage and balance your innovation with your courses and your clubs? Did you ever consider taking a gap? And how did you decide on? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and it's not only managing with classes, but also, you know, if you're starting something second semester, senior year, you have a job lined up, and so managing around your job and thinking about all those kind of things. It really is. I think you get how much time you put into it. I know a lot of folks are sort of averse to going full time straight into a startup right out of undergrad because there's a lot of risk associated with it. And I think there is the opportunity to like work a day job around it in the initial phases to try to support it until you raise sufficient funding. It just does require, I think, that amount of time per week. And as a course, right, you allocate how much ever time towards, like, maybe it's 1.5 credits or 2 credits worth of work that you're allocating towards it instead of just 1, because you really care about delivering a good product at the end of it. But the course is not going to translate the development of the technology into a successful or even a fledgling company. And that'll require, you know, 25, 30, 40 hours a week minimum to sort of help things grow. So I think that's one thing that you need to keep in mind if you're considering not doing it full-time immediately.
Can I make a comment on that, Ellie? A couple of things, again, to just tout Yale. I would absolutely recommend you guys reference some of the cross-campus classes. If you can get into one of the entrepreneurship classes at SOM, I strongly recommend it. There's some really great introductory level courses on entrepreneurship. Terrific. I want to share one, and you just were making me think of this when you were talking about part-time. One of the most brilliant things I learned in an entrepreneurship class was an acronym called RICH, R-I-C-H. And these are the things that supposedly, per the Yale professor at SOM, investors are looking for in a startup company. Okay, so R stands for repeat. You want to see people who, it's not their first rodeo, they've done a startup before. Well, that's tough when you're first out of college. So bear that in mind. The I stands for industry expertise. So whatever it is, whether you're making cupcakes or monoclonal antibodies, you better be an expert on it. Also a bit tough to do when you're fresh out of college, but you know, you get the right people. And then you get to the C, and this is the interesting thing, because what investors look for is commitment. And what that really means is they want to see this as your full-time job. It's not your weekend hobby. You're really all in. You put your mortgage on the line. You really believe in this. Now, again, take all of this with a grain of salt. I'm not saying this is gospel, but this is something that's thrown around there. So just to speak, and then H, interestingly, H stands for hometown. That's a bit different. That VCs tend to invest within 200 miles of their office. So if you're on the East Coast, don't bother looking for money on the West Coast because you're not going to get it. But think about those things in light of what we were just talking about. I apologize for interrupting.
No worries. Thank you so much, Dr. Pearlstone. And then we have our first question with a hand raised from Mpilo. Would you like to unmute and ask away?
Sounds great. I hope you can hear me fine, even with the mask. Okay, great. This is specifically towards Mrinal, but I imagine it can be applicable to all the panelists. Just walk us through the process of building a team, particularly at those early stages of business development. What sort of characteristics are you looking for, and how can you tell if someone is someone who will gel well with you and make a good teammate?
Yeah, I can start. We've had kind of an interesting approach to team building. We had a core set of co-founders with pretty strong technical skills and an interest in the area, so that was a good place to start. And we had clinical mentors as well, so that was important. After that, because we were trying to work on the cheap, essentially, a lot of our initial team members and folks we brought on board were Yale students. We reached out to the undergrad community, the MECI departments, the software departments, the BME departments, and brought students on essentially for 8 to 12 weeks independent contractor agreements. So they'd work with us on a specific task that we wanted to do over the course of 8 weeks. Normally a pretty technical task. We'd meet with them every day to sort of guide their progress. Initially, this was happening over the summer. We started doing this over the course of semesters as well. And through that process, we quickly figured out who do we like working with a lot. And one of the people we liked working with a lot ended up becoming our first full-time employee. And then who don't we like working with as much, and those people, you know, we kept to sort of an 8-week contractor agreement. That's sort of just one approach. I think what it's illustrative though of is that we found a lot of really, really talented folks just within the undergrad community at Yale, especially if you're working on something technical. I think if you're working on something clinical or medical, you might need to turn to grad students, med students, professors, that kind of thing. But if you're working on something technical, I think folks at Yale have the engineering chops to get done a lot of the early prototyping you need to do for a medical device or medical software company. So that's really where it starts.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then as our final question, we have a question in the chat from Braden. What avoidable mistake do students often make? Anything you wish you did differently or glad you did, even by accident? And Professor Campbell, would you like to take this question?
Sure, thanks. I'll try to keep this brief. I mean, first of all, it's important to learn from our mistakes, but it's also important to make mistakes. And so, you know, I can look back at any of the mistakes that I made and realize what I learned from it. So I think you have to kind of, you know, embrace that. Because, you know, when people ask me, what do you wish that you would have done differently? My answer would be, I wish that I'd had more experience when I tried it the first time, but of course that's impossible. So, you know, I guess my main encouragement would be just to dive in and don't worry about whether or not you're going to make mistakes. You will. Just worry about you having a personal process for self-evaluation and to learn quickly from those mistakes, because that's what experience is made out of, is making and recovering from mistakes.
Thank you very much. So yes, we are running close on time, 2 seconds. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their time and insight, and our attendees. As Molly mentioned before, if you were registered for the event on Eventbrite and are present, you'll receive a Grubhub gift card shortly after this Zoom for dinner. Thank you all so much for coming. Look out for upcoming CBIT as well as BMES events this month, and take care. Enjoy your break day.
There's also a quick feedback form in the chat if you want to click on that.
Great. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all very much. It was really a pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.